Hi, Ed. This is Laurel. Thank you for joining us today. We really appreciate it.
Absolutely. Happy to do it, Laurel.
I feel like there's probably a little tit for tat going on, I think, with that as well. So,
Absolutely.
okay, so we're just coming up to 3 o'clock now. We've got a bunch of people on, so I will get the session started as we have a fantastic presenter and a great topic as well today. So my name is Kevin. I'm from Taleo, and welcome again to our weekly Taleo Connects webinar series. I'm here with Don Fiender-McCann, who will be taking care of the Q&A session after we kind of get going. So thanks again for joining us. This is a weekly series that we'll be doing. We're very, very happy to welcome you and thank you for your time. I know everybody's time is very, very valuable this time, so thank you again for coming. Just as an FYI, you are eligible for 0.5 of PDU for joining this session. So for those of you out there that are interested in that, please go ahead and do that. And without too much further ado, I would like to pass this over because I know we have a great session today. So again, we are very, very fortunate and lucky to have Dr. Ed Hoffman with us. Currently, he is the Information and Knowledge Strategy at Columbia University. And as everybody read in the bio that I sent out, he is the former Chief Knowledge Officer at NASA. So he's got a lot of fun stories and interesting things. And he's out on the East Coast now. So Ed, without further ado, I'll pass it over to you.
All right. Well, thank you very much, Kevin. Thank you, everybody. I understand that the notion here is to talk for about 10 or so minutes and then take questions. So I'll base it on that. Very quick background is I spent most of my career at NASA. I had the strange opportunity of running learning and development for leaders just at the time that the Challenger disaster took place. And then NASA asked me to set up a NASA Academy around programs and projects. I didn't really have the background for it, but it really worked out well, which probably makes it ready for the adaptive changes to come. And then I spent the last half a dozen years as the Chief Knowledge Officer. The focus was really on programs, projects, making sure our individuals and teams had the learning and the tools and the technology to succeed. Since 2016, I've been a strategic advisor for the Project Management Institute, largely working with organizations in their Global Executive Council. So I get to hear the questions, their issues, their challenges, work with many of them. And then I'm also senior lecturer at Columbia University, where I'm focused around information and knowledge management type issues. It's a leadership development program around knowledge, technology, and data. I see my friend Young from George Washington University was on the line. I taught there for probably over a decade. Future of work. I don't think I'm going to tell you things that you haven't heard, specifically with the backgrounds you have, but perhaps I will emphasize things that I think are very important. I'll start off with an example from NASA, because Kevin frankly said, make sure you start off with an example from NASA. So I'm doing that. I even dressed for you, Kevin, with the little meatball.
Thank you.
But truthfully, we all learn from where we work. NASA, when you think of it, it's considered a spotlight organization. It's technology, it's engineering and science. What I really found was the key driver for that place was people. Even though they tended not to talk about, even today, they tend to like to talk with the project, the methodology, the process, the data, the technology. But success and failure typically comes from how we work together with the NASA community. 90% of the work was with industry and supply chain. 80% of every project is international. And virtually everything is done for universities. So it's a very strange organization in that it comes to how do you work with others who you don't have ownership over, in a sense. The 2003 Columbia disaster, I saw as a total difference from what happened almost exactly 6 years later, where we had a shuttle that was getting ready to take off. We found a problem in 2009 on a flow valve, engineering flow valve. And what was done in 2009 successfully, which did not happen earlier, was that we worked as a team, we collaborated, we looked at the data, we developed new technology and tools. We basically used the collective intelligence of our technology, our data, and our people to work the program correctly. So largely the same people, the same organization, the same project management process, the same tools, two totally different examples. One a case study in failure and embarrassment, frankly, and the other an example and a case study in how to do things right. So what accounts for the performance of variability? I think that's the key thing. And so that leads to, 7 factors around the future of work. Again, I don't think this is new. This has been influenced by the work of a lot of others. But to me, this is what I would emphasize. I start with inclusion and appreciation. To me, it's about the people. If you're developing a technology, the technology will be useful, will work if it has people in mind, if it's prototyping with people, if the conversations are there, if it's customer and user centric. When we get away from that, and the natural drive, I believe, for scientists, for engineers, for project people, is there's so much pressure on getting it done that we design things sometimes, and we'll get to the people later. I think that is always a mistake. The biggest challenge I had at NASA, which was a learning organization, but the pressure for a project is to do things, to get the engineering done, to work it, to design it. And that sometimes pushes out the learning and the people. The focus today in terms of work heavily is around people, how you attract people, the people that want to stay with you, is that there has to be a sense of an inclusion, that they're part of a mission, their voices are being heard, they see diversity in where they're working, and it leads to a sense of an appreciation for my environment. So it's heavy, soft, we can take discussions, I'm happy to continue that. But what I always said at NASA, what I say now to the organizations, you have to figure out how to appreciate the people that work with you and that you're working for. And it can't be just language. It has to be something that people see. There's many different ways of doing that. The best, I think, organizations, teams do that.
Ed,
Second, yeah.
Do you mind if I ask a question now, or do you want to continue on?
No,
Okay.
let's not, yeah.
What I find really interesting in what you were saying earlier from 2003 to 2009, I heard the academics, NASA engineers, right?
Yeah.
So you've got a lot of egos coming in.
Yeah.
How much of the change or culture change or acceptance of others and that collaboration that you talked about that was so important, how much of that was your leadership and how much of that was other work, or like I see what you're saying here,
Yeah.
but how did that gap get filled?
Right, the reality is that big failure is an incentive to get better.
Okay.
Because if you don't no one wants to go out of business and no one wants to fail. So NASA got significantly better after difficult failures. And I'd like to say that it was enlightenment and it was leadership and we got it. I think one of the problems of project age is there's so much pressure to produce something. There's the focus on time, on schedule, get it done, that when things are going reasonably well, the drive goes towards the finance people, do it quicker, do it faster. You can do it cheaper. Cheaper means you don't need to spend time with the customer. Cheaper means you don't need to train. Cheaper means you don't need to test. So you build up what becomes a problem. You have, unfortunately, sometimes the big boom, and then people say, why didn't you train these people? Why didn't you talk to these people? Why didn't you do the things you're supposed to do? So there's a there's a balance. But I think I was able to do the things I did at NASA because every 5 to 6 years we had a painful failure that made us stop and say we need to learn. The other thing that I would say, after Challenger, the culture did not change dramatically. There was still a sense of this was an act of God. It wasn't leadership. After Columbia, it changed dramatically because during those 10 years in between, there was training, there was development, and that young generation that didn't have the influence to make the change now moved up into a position where they were running teams and the organization, and they used that learning to change things dramatically.
Okay. All right.
But
No.
I think there has to be a reason. I always tell the students that have in the knowledge course, if you go and advise organization that you're doing any of these activities because it's good for you, you know, people aren't motivated mostly by good for you. They're motivated by the pressure to succeed and by profit. So you have to have that kind of pressure point
The
that people
crisis.
see it.
Yeah.
Yeah, or you need to have a threat of another organization is going to put you out of business. Or you can have a leader who comes on board who's kind of crazy and is pushing a new way to do their business. But people, to me, they're risk averse. And no one wants to take a chance of doing something different in most cases. And so change comes because we have to change.
Right.
And one of the things that I've been educating a lot of our clients on is around the risk of not doing this versus it being a priority for the organization. And although they might be the exact same things, using the word risk changes the conversation. Can you share with us kind of your experience around changing the language, but really having the same message?
Yeah. So there are times you have to politically change the message. For example, at NASA, they hated the notion of knowledge management because I would get, frankly, smart-ass engineers and scientists who said, you can't manage my knowledge, right? And it would become kind of like a threat. But then we started calling it knowledge sharing. And we called, and they loved it. A simple word. So there's a little bit of that, how do you, but again, it's a people thing, right? You can't manage my knowledge, but we can share together. One of the things I also found is one of the beauties of projects is that you have to take risks seriously. You have a methodology of approach. You have to just say what can go wrong. And my view is if you have organizations or teams that know risk, then it helps you in the learning and in the knowledge. So I leverage closely the relationship with the risk and safety office at NASA to basically say, what are the risks to the missions and the projects? And then the learning and the knowledge would collaborate there. And again, so I would basically say, if you're interested in learning, in extending knowledge, in trying new things, in innovation, then at some way, I think there has to be a discussion around what are the risks of our organization failing or not succeeding if we don't think about different ways of coming up with new ideas.
Excellent.
So I think, I love risk because to me that was the other thing that saved it. I found that if a project team had something that we were emphasizing, something that we were trying to change within their risk profile, then project people took it seriously. As an example of that, when we were setting up the Chief Knowledge Office, this was in 2010, the leadership asked me, do we want a policy? And they were stunned when I said I did, because I was known as someone who didn't like rules, right? And so they were stunned. But I said, if you want this to last, we have to have some form of governance for how we do things. The second thing they said, do you want your own policy? I said, absolutely not. No one at NASA cares about a knowledge or learning policy. It means nothing. But it had to be part of the chief engineer's program, engineering and projects, and it was. And it got taken seriously. To the point where when the chief engineer left and the new one came on board, I got a call from the new guy who said, I understand I'm responsible for knowledge and learning in the engineering and project community. I said, yeah, how do you know that? He said, it says in the policy I'm responsible for it. And he said, I have no idea how that happened, but I assume it was because of you. But it changed everything. It meant that there's consideration. So language and thought and strategy is really important in these kind of things. And if we don't think about them, then we can talk about learning. But again, learning is an overhead. I was always an overhead cost. So I had to quickly explain to people the value, and either they saw it or they didn't. Fortunately, technology people, engineers, and project people are they're very practical. And I found out very early in that kind of environment that if I could do something that would help a project or a team, then they would take me, they would steal me, they would use it. If I was neutral or negative, they would tell me I was useless and totally ignore me. So it was a beautiful environment. So I love projects in engineering. I found scientists much more difficult because they think in a different sphere. They don't have to be practical. They don't have to, they can take long durations. But the engineering and project folks are very logical. So the learning stuff, the change stuff, the new technologies, the tools, if they felt it would help them, they would use it. So all the messages to me of the future really geared to that. I say to organizations and leaders and my students, you better be good at teams, because you will no longer be able to do anything and be successful by yourself. Mm-hmm. So it doesn't happen. Most work is done across the oceans, different countries. Most projects are done with totally different disciplines. You have legal folks, you have software folks, you have research people, you have people who are totally different. They don't naturally like each other. Engineers don't like having to go to legal people, but they have to. So you have to build the team. And I could always tell at NASA that I can see certain teams that would do well because they knew how to like each other. Mm-hmm. And teams that would run into problems, they would tell me, I know I have to take this to international affairs. It's a technology that's going to go to a partner, but I don't want to tell them right now. I want to wait. And that would always lead to, if you don't want to talk with the group, your project's going to have a problem.
So is that the canary in a coal mine then? If they don't want to talk, like
the canary in the coal mine is if you're working on a team and they're noisy and they're loud and they're laughing and they're yelling and they're walking and there's noise, then that to me was they're in good shape. When I work with a team and they're very quiet,
okay.
Or when I ask the question, I said, what are the problems you're having? And they tell me they have no problems. My joke is, are you married? Do you have no problems with the person you love? So you're telling me you got hundreds of people you're working with and you have no problems? Mm-hmm. That would make me nervous. So yeah, when people get quiet, when they're not arguing, when they're not having emotions, when they're in total agreement, that would make me sweat. Then I knew something was really wrong. They didn't want to be honest with each other. The lack of what Amy Edmondson calls psychological safety is the most important thing for a team. The ability to say anything and stay together.
Or the defensiveness around, when you tell someone something and they say, I know, and you know that if they're saying I know all the time, as a knowledge officer, you can't know, right? Like, so you ask, how do you know?
And that's why risk management was so important, because I would ask the teams, I said, show me your risk. And I'd say, what's not on it that's going to lead to a problem? I was asking a question that was painful to someone. They were holding something back. They didn't want headquarters to know. They didn't want other centers to know. They didn't want their contract teams to know. Big problem, right? So the whole notion of being able to be honest and have arguments and have discussions and laugh is that human dimension, that inclusion, that appreciation that leads typically to strong teams. Not the only thing. You also have to have a focus on what are you trying to produce? What's your vision? What are your goals? All good project management things. You then have to have a management project. You have to have, what's the process for doing the things? But I'm convinced if you don't get that human side, the inclusion, the appreciation, the discussion, the openness, then you can't have an effective team. If people don't feel appreciated, the biggest thing I would see is I had a guy who left NASA as one of their best systems engineers. This is a long time ago. And he left to go to Best Buy's competitor. It was a company, Circuit City. it was mind-blowing that a guy who's managing systems engineering at NASA would leave to go to Circuit City, basically a retail store. And I said, why are you doing this? He said, it's crazy. It's a stupid move. But, I gotten to the point where I don't feel appreciated here. And I really don't like what I'm doing or where I'm working. And I don't think it's going to change. So we got into a discussion with senior leadership as how is it possible that one of our best systems engineers left to go to Circuit City, and it was the human factors, wasn't all these other things. But again, the future is all this coming together, so it's much more complex. Technology is amazing. It's a game changer. It's vital. AI, deep learning, robotics. I think these are good things. I don't see them as threats, but they have to be humanized, even with a society. So you get people who, when they talk to me from different towns or locations, they're scary of robots. They're concerned that it's going to take jobs and it's going to destroy the economy and all that. And I think if you look historically, technology has always improved things, but we don't often enough have conversations with people. And when you don't have conversations, people will fill the space by creating their own stories. And those stories are usually, they're usually negative. So I think that's a key part of it. One of the things, again, I would tell the project leaders and the leadership is talk to your people. And I would often hear, well, I don't have anything to say. I said, then you're in the wrong job. Leadership is all about, or I'd get a lot of project managers at NASA would say, this would be a great job if I didn't have to deal with people. Again, you're in the wrong, that's the whole job is you got to get people comfortable. You got to be, otherwise, you should be doing something else. The other thing that I think future of work that's increasingly important is social responsibility. I don't think it's ticked as much, but when I talk to the students, young folks I had, they want to work with places that provide value to their communities, their cities, and to society. They're concerned about gender equality. They're concerned about poverty. They're concerned about data privacy. And I think that in the coming years, I think that will be a bigger issue.
Absolutely.
You have to worry about.
Absolutely. We are at 3:20 now, and I feel like I've monopolized your conversation, with the exception of one question from Laurel. Are there any questions?
Everything else I have after this is just to make my case, but
okay.
We can just take questions.
Sure.
These are the things that are vital, and I think they're great, but they're also they're dual edged. Just to say, so freelancing and gig. I have friends in the movie industry, and it's kind of glamorous and it's cool. But what they'll tell me is when they're working on a good movie, and if they're working on Pinocchio with Guillermo del Toro, life is wonderful. But once that movie is done, that project is over, and where do they get their next job? So I tell my students, you need to really be very different from me. I spent 33 years at NASA, and I thought I was going to be there for 30 years. When I was in my 20s, that was the norm. And I thought, why would I ever leave NASA? I don't want to leave NASA. I want to stay here. But I tell my my kids, I tell my students, you have to be open to different things, and you have to keep your skills, and you have to keep learning. You have to have a network, because you will probably be moving around every few years. Mm-hmm. So there's an opportunity. Some people, I think, like that. But if you think you're going to be in one place and you don't have to learn and improve your skills, I think we're going to have a significant part of the population that's going to be very disappointed and angry. So, yeah, why don't we just take questions? And
yeah. Kevin, are there any questions piling up, or am I allowed to ask some more?
You go right ahead. For anybody who would like to ask questions, go ahead. You can either put them in the chat or just open your mic up and feel free to jump in. So go ahead, Don. And
I'm going to have to look on you to give me the chat, because with the big screen, or I guess I could stop sharing. Right?
So I do have a question as you're kind of stopping and sharing. You went to the gig economy, and you were talking about that for a bit. So let's talk for a bit about the inward piece. So you've told us the outward piece, and you have to communicate, and you've had these students, and you're an excellent mentor, and you're a great role model. But when you start to feel like crap when you're finished that cool job, in the gig economy, where do you go to get your rejuvenation? Because a lot of us are feeling right now like, oh yeah, that's great what I just did, and you're out for your walk at lunch and you're going, well, what's going to happen? What does that look like for you, if you don't mind sharing?
For me personally,
Mm.
I mean, I was lucky. You know, I had a long career at NASA. Life was good. Went over to PMI, doing stuff there, teaching at Columbia. I'm very, very busy, and I'll get to the point. Sometimes I think nowadays, if I were smart, I would be less busy, frankly. So, you know, the new opportunities, technology has been phenomenal for me. I'll give you a quick story. So I was designing a course for Columbia that we held called Navigating the Future of Work. And we did it in January. It was the last time actually we all came together, you know, for 5 days. And I was asked to give a talk in Washington, D.C. at some connection between Columbia and MIT. And I had a nice audience, and I let them know in an hour what it was about. And fairly quickly in the open questions, I had a woman ask a great question, which is, she said, your students and the people you engage with are probably successful. They're probably tech savvy. They're probably well educated. They're probably middle class and better, and they probably have a lot of opportunities. And I knew where she was going. She said, what are you teaching about the future of work for the people who don't have any of those things? And, you know, so I think that's one of the massive questions for society. I think the coming changes, there are a lot of people who are going to do really well, I think, coming out of the different crises and issues, because if you're technologically savvy, you can develop new things. You can work from Rehoboth Beach or any place where we're at. So you can be with your family. You can network with friends all over the world. You can do a variety of things. Life is good. But that is all dependent on being fairly educated. That means you have a really good network. Probably means you had really good family that developed, you know, that. You know, you have healthcare, you have all these things. And my challenge really isn't for my students or when I talk to organizations at PMI or folks like you. My challenge is when I talk at different locations and people don't have any of that. And they are rightfully scared. They don't have jobs. I mean,
Yeah.
so
It's
so I don't know, how do you get people who aren't there? I can help people to get an education, but I tell a lot of people not to go to Columbia because it's too expensive, frankly. I mean,
it's fantastic thoughts, and lots of logic and reality there. When you were talking, and when Laurel was talking as well about language and using language that made people be interested, I had this image, I don't know, because of the NASA context, of the stars and us focusing just on the stars, but there's a whole lot in that negative space, in that space that's not the stars, right? And so for me, that when you're talking about that language, you're highlighting the negative space instead of focusing on the stars, the scope, cost, schedule stuff with the PMI, right? Like, which is great. I'm not suggesting that that's not important.
Yeah.
But
I think there are two storylines, you know, that I guess one of the things I teach is stories, big storyteller. What I found every place I've worked is you can create, you know, what my colleague Charlie Pellerin led the Hubble Space Telescope, and he did a lot of teaming stuff for us when we were trying to build up teams. And we found out that you get people who tell two kinds of stories. One is kind of a horror story, a Stephen King story, a story of failure. They're red line stories. And they tell you about how things are not going to work out. And then there are people who tell stories of challenge, but they're going to be successful. And you can hear it in the language, in the words that are used. They've actually used this stuff to predict the successes of marriages as well as teams. And one of the things that you find is that effective leaders, effective project managers, effective systems engineers and people, they tend to have a positive spin overall in the stories that they tell themselves and others. So I think storytelling is a key, actually kind of a skill that would be out there. So language is very, very important because it prepares us for either being excited or to be, I could look at this discussion. So here, started at 5 p.m., been working all day. And, I guess people would say, why are you doing that? You're not getting paid, you're doing this. But to me, hey, this is a thrill. I'm excited. I'm a natural ham, so I like to engage. I'm naturally social. I get to meet with Kathy and Laurel and Young and all these people. So it's cool. So partly it's the story of how we prepare ourselves. So language is very, very important.
Exactly. Oh no, it's fantastic. I'm interested because Kathy introduced herself. I don't know if everyone was on when she introduced herself, and you were his PhD student, were you, Kathy?
I was. I met
You
him
were.
in
So,
Lille, France.
and for me, for her to show up today and you to do this, I just feel very blessed that I got, because a PhD student doesn't show up for just anyone, right?
Oh, okay.
So I feel very blessed, and I love.
Matthew was always a very smart student.
I'm a huge fan, and one of the things I will always remember with Dr. Hoffman, I was actually leading the program management development program at Boeing. I was at Boeing for over 21 years, and I invited him to come speak to our project management community. And at that conference, we had about a little over 400 employees attending. And the one thing I'll never forget, what he mentioned, and I still keep it in my thoughts to this day, is reflective learning. Always take time to reflect on your day, reflect on your, where you are currently with your personal life, your career. And that actually, from a risk management standpoint, kind of tagging on to, all of the key themes he talked about, was my being as risk averse as I am as a project manager. I actually left Boeing after 21 years, and I decided to take that step because through reflective learning, I was able to understand that I needed to grow and learn and do something different. So I attribute a lot of my learnings, my decisions on reflective learning, thanks to Dr. Hoffman.
Oh,
He's someone I will always follow.
I love that, and people are starting to drop off. Unfortunately, we're at the end of our time. But thank you so much for sharing that, Kathy, at the end.
Yeah,
thank you, Dr. Hoffman.
I always remember the great dinner we had also together in California.
Boeing was on a budget. Sorry, Dr. Hoffman.
Okay.
Oh,
It was
love
a great
it, love
dinner.
it. Kevin, do you have any thank instructions? Or I really appreciate it, really enjoyed it. Thank you so much.
Instructions, of course, not for you, Don, but I just want to thank, first of all, Dr. Hoffman for joining us today. I know your time is very valuable. You're with your family now, so it is much appreciated. Once again, we do this weekly series, Taleo Connects. We have recorded this session and posting it on our Taleo Connects YouTube channel. So we will make that available to everyone afterwards. So once again, thank you very much for your time. Dr. Hoffman, thank you so much. It was a pleasure chatting with you last week and this week as well. And we're very fortunate to have you on board with us.
Nice to meet you too, Kathy. Take care.
Thank you. I enjoyed it.
Bye.